Right, let's get down to it. This is an interview we've been promising you all day, and it is with Jungle Ventures. Jungle Ventures has raised $240 million in its third round fund. You see the likes of Temasek, Cisco participate in this round. The venture fund has invested in the likes of LiveSpace, Moglix in India. Ratan Tata, incidentally, is a board member of Jungle Ventures. I'm going to be talking more about Jungle Ventures, its plans, how it's seeing the startup universe in India. Can it become the Silicon Valley of the East? Let's go across to the co-founder, Amit Anand, who's joining us on Skype, all the way from Singapore. Hi, Amit. Good evening. Welcome to Startup Central. Really appreciate you taking the time out for this interview. So first up, congratulations. $250 million closing of the fund. By when do you plan to deploy it all? Is it only for India? What's the game plan?
Thank you, Nantara, for having me on the show, and certainly very exciting to read about Mr. Tata debuting on Instagram on your show. So definitely somebody that we always look forward to. No, we Jungle is a Singapore-based firm, and we've been investing in Southeast Asia and India for almost 8 years now, and continue to be excited about Indian tech entrepreneurship. We've had some really successful investments with companies like LiveSpace and Moglix, SpaceSense, Vayana. There's more than 7 to 8 now, and we look forward to backing more entrepreneurs.
So, I wanted you also invest in other countries like Indonesia. I'm just going to get to that in a bit, but I want to talk to you first about what we are seeing in India. We have seen Jungle make a lot of investments of late. We've seen people like Tiger, for example, also double down on investments. If I could first get a sense from you on what's happening in the startup universe in India. There's all this talk of, is it overheated? Are the valuations sustainable? And remember, these are all private valuations. No one's gone public as yet.
And I know there is a lot of global scrutiny around the venture capital industry, so I kind of understand where you're coming from. If I would break this down, Nayantra, if you look at valuations in the venture industry, even if you look at some of the current infamous stories, what you'll realize is that in the early stages of the venture ecosystem, funds like Jungle and several others operate, which is in the Series A, Series B stages. There's actually a lot of sanity in the market, and I feel proud of being part of that community. Where in early stages we set a lot of good practices around governance, around valuations. It's really during the later stages in the global markets, the pre-IPO markets, is where we've seen, in some cases, investors have gone overboard. But in general, I think in the early stages of venture, I feel the valuations are still very relevant to the businesses and the disruptions that they're causing, and not necessarily see any bubble there.
Okay, so you don't see a bubble. I ask a lot of the venture capitalists as well as entrepreneurs I get on the show. I want to get your views on it. I know you live in Singapore, but I know you track everything in India very, very closely. We talk about this slowdown, what's happening in the economy. But then you talk about startups, and there's this exuberance, excitement that you don't see in the traditional economy. If you even looked, 2 months ago at our stock markets, we were seeing everybody sell out, but there was a maximum inflow of funds in the startup universe. Why is it that the Indian startups apni dunya mein in a parallel universe? What's going on?
I think you probably have to step back and understand the startup ecosystem a little bit. It takes at least 5 to 7 years for a startup to cause a complete disruption to whatever space they are going after. And I think maybe part of the reasons why you don't see a huge impact in terms of negative sentiments on some of these startups is because they are still in very early stages. They're still dealing with early adopters of their products and services. And by the time they kind of hit the big markets, the sentiment would have turned in their favor. In general, I feel if you look across emerging markets, there is a growing confidence that technology-based companies are servicing the real needs of these young consumers in these markets as against the traditional businesses. And so I think that you will continue to see startups gain at the disadvantage of traditional industries.
So now tell me something. What is Jungle looking forward to in India? You know, there are always certain buzzwords, and the idea for early stage investors like yourselves is to make sure you're on board before it becomes a buzzword, right? So what's got you excited at the moment?
Right. Um, I don't want to start using buzzwords like automation, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and go down that path. But I would have to admit that digital transformation of every industry, especially small and medium enterprises, is a very strong sentiment that long-term secular trend that Jungle has been backing. We invested in Moglix and Vayana early in the day. We invested in Engineer.ai recently, and they all part of one large theme of investments that we make, which is every small mom and pop shop or every small manufacturer or every small to medium wholesaler is looking to leverage technology to be more efficient, to be more global. And the domestic platforms, the local platforms are achieving those, achieving a lot of success with them. And so we continue to be looking definitely more closely in, I would say, SME digitization.
No, but I mean, isn't that obvious? I think that's pretty much obvious. I was hoping that you would get a little more specific. For example, you know, there was a view at some point that e-commerce had peaked, right? And and these are largely e-commerce companies, which, if I could call it, were a Me Too model from the West. Along came Nykaa, along came Meesho, and many other such companies. So I was actually hoping if you could help us spot early trends of what's exciting these days.
Sure. I think you can break it down from a consumer versus a software perspective. I would say in the software space, certain B2B commerce continues to be a very strong area of interest. And what I mean by that is how can a small manufacturer sitting in Jaipur not only sell to different parts of India as customers, but also can sell globally. And today, the options for them are very limited. It requires a lot of effort in terms of currency conversions, in terms of logistics, in terms of global trade. And so, digital platforms that are enabling connectivity between businesses in India to businesses globally from a commerce perspective is one large trend that I would say is yet to have unfolded in markets like India, where you've seen China and many companies in China, create those platforms for Chinese manufacturers, for Chinese brands to go global on the back of those platforms. I think that trend will certainly happen in India in the next few years as well. We continue to be very excited about the software industry in India. It's a no-brainer that we've been a very large supplier of software services to the world, and today we are on the third iteration of sort of creating software products for the world. Vertical SaaS continues to be an emerging trend where we have found great opportunities in India. We found great opportunities in areas like artificial intelligence. Tuki Taki is an example of an Indian company which we've helped take global now. And as you know, they specifically solve KYC AML issues for large financial institutions using artificial intelligence.
Okay. Now, if I could get your perspective on India versus the rest of Asia. You know, we keep talking about a $5 trillion economy. That is the target. It's not going to be possible without startups, right? We also have visions and ambitions of being, you know, the equivalent of the Bay Area or Silicon Valley in the East. Is that going to happen in India, or, you know, is it a tough fight with the other countries?
I think India has well moved into becoming one of the ecosystems that's going to create for the world. I think the last 10 to 15 years, we've seen companies like Flipkart and several others create for domestic. But I think the ambitions of the Indian entrepreneurs, of the Indian investors, of the talent there has now started to reach for outside as well. Certainly in Asia, I would say cities like Bangalore, Singapore, Jakarta are places where you see concentration of talent, capital, access to markets, and all of them have strong potential to be technology hubs. And that's the beauty about Asia, I would say, as compared to Silicon Valley. There's only one Silicon Valley, but I think in this region we have 3 to 4 cities which are emerging as technology hubs. initially starting to create for their domestic markets, but like India, starting to look at global markets as well.
But for India to also become a mature startup central or a startup universe, all of that, we're going to have to start talking about exits, right? We're going to have to start talking about startups going public, about public valuations. It works very well for someone like you. You invest early, then along comes another fund and buys you out. I'm guessing that's a modus operandi. But is this sustainable?
So Jungle, so far our exits have largely been to large corporates. We've sold companies to the likes of Twitter, Rakuten in Japan, and to other such large corporates. But I understand your point. I think by and large, even if you look at the US, 80% of the liquidity that funds generate is driven through mergers and acquisitions. And it's only 20% of their portfolio that tends to go IPO. So I think you need a combination of both, and this is where I believe shows like yours are playing a very important role to raise public awareness. When companies like LiveSpace think about who knows when, but eventually going IPO, hopefully in the Indian IPO markets, they should be a household brand, and through shows like this, the consumers should be excited about becoming investors in those brands. And so I'm confident that that path is we are on that path as Indian sort of startups. But I would have to admit that there's only very few companies that will explore and be able to tap into the IPO market. A majority of them will find liquidity through mergers and acquisitions, which is I think it's a growing trend in India and Southeast Asia, and will continue to grow from here as the likes of Google's, Twitter's, Facebook's, even the local domestic players like Geo and several others like Flipkart will make acquisitions.
For everybody who's tuning in, I'm going to ask this question on their behalf. All the founders, entrepreneurs, how do they reach out to Jungle? Is it usually word of mouth? I'm sure your LinkedIn is something you can't even go through all of the messages, or Twitter and all of that. Is it usually word of mouth?
I would say 90% of the deals that Jungle invests in are either word of mouth or a proactive reach out by Jungle to the entrepreneur. But I do want to give a specific feedback since you asked the question. I think one of the best ways to get access to firms like Jungle is to get in touch with our founders. We have more than 8 or 9 companies in India and some really talented entrepreneurs. They act as extended reach of the Jungle brand, and we've gotten access to some fantastic entrepreneurs through them as well. So I think one of the best people to talk to is your peers. It's the founders that Jungles have backed.
Tell me, what are Jungle's do's and don'ts for founders? What is it that you like about founders and companies? And, reverse pitch to us and tell us, what is it about a founder you'll never go near? What are the don'ts?
As they say never. So I don't think I'm going to be able to answer your second question. But on the first one, certainly I can tell you some hacks, some cheats that we've seen founders execute very well to get attention from investors. Personally, and at Jungle, one of the things that we really like to understand is most startups go for a very big idea and they talk about how they're going to transform $1 billion industry or a $10 billion company. That was great. Obviously, we understand that. But what we are more interested in is what your next 12 months look like. How are you going to go from your first 100 customers to your first 1,000 customers? How are you going to be able to solve that one problem that is not letting you grow as fast as you think you can? How are you going to execute on the leadership hiring plan that you have? And I think this bottoms up view of how you're building your business typically doesn't come very often, very easily to entrepreneurs. They try and come and show and tell, make big pitches. But I think investors like us really like to understand the nitty-gritties. How is the next 12 months going to look like? Let's talk about that first. And then eventually, yes, we'll get to a very large opportunity segment anyways.
Okay, with that, Amit, we're running out of time. I'd like to thank you. But before I do that, do you have a favorite in your Indian portfolio? Or would that be like cheating?
Oh, that would definitely be unfair to pick your favorite child. But I would say that we are extremely excited about the entire portfolio in India. We've helped companies like Live Space expand into Singapore, Vayana expand into the US, Engineer expand into the US. So I think the role we like to play is if you're an entrepreneur building a business locally, but you believe there's an opportunity outside of India for you, Jungle certainly wants to be one of the partners that helps you do that.
Okay, Amit. With that, thanks so much and congratulations to the entire Startup Central team on your fund. We look forward to getting you back on the channel as soon as you start deploying that capital.
Look forward to that. Thank you so much for having me here and have a good show.
Well, there you go. That's early stage investor, Jungle, only on Startup Central, and really getting you a ringside view also on what it is that they look for founders and how to pitch to them. So good hacks coming in from the co-founder of Jungle. Reach out to one of the founders that they've invested in. It's usually word of mouth. They like to chase founders, and of course, the do's and don'ts of what they look for in startups.